Thiek High By Extending Part 1. Same Marin, same Sera/Aliner/narrator, same beats. Going deeper, more atmosphere on the wall and the find, more weight on Dunmore, a slower walk into the palace, more of Aliner. No filler, every added line earns its place. The guard who found the lost heirloom, and the Duchess who couldn't ignore it. A story of the kingdom of Marin. Part 1 of 3, extended. You can work the palace gates for 20 years and think you've seen everything. I had, or I thought I had, 2 decades on the line at Aldenhall, the old royal seat of Marin, and there isn't much the forecourt hadn't shown me. I'd seen tourists faint dead away in the August heat and have to be carried into the shade. I'd seen a young man drop to one knee with a ring and a speech he'd clearly rehearsed for weeks, and I'd seen the woman shake her head and walk off, and I'd had to stand there, eyes front, not allowed to so much as blink, while a stranger's heart broke 6 feet in front of me. I'd seen a fox come trotting across the empty forecourt one winter dawn, calm as anything, picking its way over the cobbles like it had the deeds to the place in its pocket. 20 years. I genuinely thought there was nothing left that could surprise me. I had not seen what I found that gray October morning, low down behind a loose stone in the old west wall. And I had certainly never imagined what it would set moving, all the way up and over my head, past me, past my sergeant, past the private secretaries and the people in gray suits, right up to the young Duchess herself, to Aliner, to a woman whose face the whole country knew by heart and whom almost nobody, I'd come to learn, actually knew at all. Let me start where it really started, with the rain and the wall and a small rusted thing that should have stayed lost. It was the dead end of October, and the whole of Marin had gone the color of old pewter. You know that sky? That flat, low, lidded gray that comes down over the city in late autumn and just sits there for weeks like something switched off. The cold that time of year isn't the sharp, clean kind. It's damp. It doesn't bite so much as soak, gets into the seams of your coat, into the joints of your hands, into the leather of your boots. By the end of a shift, you're cold in a way no fire quite fixes. The tourists had thinned right out by then. That's the thing about October at Aldenhall. You lose the summer crowds, the great noisy press of them in their thin t-shirts and their sun hats, all taking the same photograph 1,000 times over. What you get instead are the hardy ones. The ones in proper coats and sensible boots who actually stop and read the little brass plaques, who ask the stewards real questions, who came for the place itself and not just to tick it off a list. I always preferred them, if I'm honest, quieter, respectful. They treat the old stones like they're owed something, and maybe they are. I was on the early shift that morning. Forecourt patrol, west side, the long slow walk you do before the gates even open to the public, checking the line, checking the ground, just being a pair of eyes on the place while it's still asleep. And it was properly still. Just me and the pigeons fussing along the parapets, and the city coming awake somewhere out beyond the railings. A bin lorry grinding down a far street, the first buses hissing past. A church bell off to the east counting out 7 slow strokes into the cold. There's a particular feeling to the palace at that hour, before the crowds, before the cameras, before any of the show starts up. It's almost like the building is just a building again. Just very old stone, holding very old air, waiting for the day to put its costume back on. I've always liked the early shift for that. You feel, for an hour or two, like the place lets you in on something. Aldenhall is old, properly deeply old. The modern palace, the grand front everyone photographs, that was built on later, dressed over the top. But round the back, the west side, parts of that wall go back 400 years. Long before the monarchs everyone remembers. And that old wall is forever crumbling, no matter what they spend on it. The mortar gives up, the damp gets in, a hard winter loosens a course of stone and down it comes. That month there was scaffolding up along a good stretch of it, restoration work. Masons in every day, chipping out the dead mortar by hand and packing fresh lime back in, slow and patient, the way it has to be done. And that morning, walking my line, I saw something the masons must have worked loose the day before and never noticed. A stone, down low, near the very base of the wall, about knee-height to a standing man. Not fallen, just sitting proud of the others, pushed out a finger's width, with a thin dark gap behind it where the old mortar had crumbled clean away. The kind of thing you'd walk past 100 times and never see. I only caught it because the low sun, what thin, watery light there was, came slanting under the scaffold boards for about 10 minutes that hour and caught the edge of that one stone, and threw a little shadow behind it. By rights I should have just noted it and reported it. Loose stonework, west wall, base course for the masons. That's the job. That's all the job asked of me. You don't go poking about in the fabric of a 400-year-old royal wall on a whim. You log it and you walk on. But something stopped me. I crouched down to look closer, telling myself I was only checking how bad it was, how far it had shifted, and once I was down there, eye to eye with that little dark gap, I couldn't help myself. I don't really know why. You just do these things sometimes against your own better sense. I worked my cold fingers into the gap, got a grip on the loose stone, and eased it out and set it down on the wet ground beside me. And behind it, in a hollow, a deliberate little cavity that somebody had cut into the heart of that wall a very, very long time ago, was a small tin box. I want to be honest about what actually went through me in that moment, because it wasn't anything grand. It wasn't a sense of destiny. It wasn't a chill of fate. It was just plain and simple. What on earth is that doing in there? The box was old. Properly old. Tin, gone soft and dark with rust at every corner, the lid seized down tight with the years. No bigger than the sort of tin you might once have kept a pack of playing cards in, or a few letters, or a child's small treasures. And it had been wrapped once, you could see that. Wrapped in oilcloth to keep the wet off it. But the oilcloth had long since rotted down to almost nothing, just dark sodden rags of it still clinging round the edges, coming away on my fingers like cobweb. Somebody had hidden this. That was the thing I couldn't get past, kneeling there in the cold. This wasn't lost. This wasn't dropped or fallen or forgotten in a drawer. Somebody had taken a chisel or paid someone to and cut a hollow into the inner stone of a royal wall and wrapped this box against the damp and placed it inside and sealed a stone over the front of it. Deliberately, carefully, with intent. And then, for whatever reason in all the world, they had never come back for it. Never, not in all the years it took for that mortar to crumble and that stone to work loose again on its own. I knelt there holding it, this cold, rusted little tin, and I had the strangest, strongest feeling come over me that I had interrupted something. That this box had been set down in the dark on purpose, and had been waiting patiently in the black and the silence inside that wall for a very long time, waiting for someone to come, and that the someone, out of every soul who'd ever walked that forecourt in 20 years, had turned out to be me. A guard on an early shift, who only saw it because the sun came out for 10 minutes. I knew better than to open it. We're trained on that. Anything found on the grounds, you don't touch the contents, you don't pry, you log it and you hand it up the chain exactly as you found it. Chain of custody, they call it. So I didn't force the lid, much as my whole hand was itching to. I just stayed there a moment longer, on my heels in the damp, turning the box over once, gently, feeling the small shift of something loose inside it. Then I stood up, slid the loose stone back roughly where it had been so the hollow wasn't sitting open, and I carried the box, both hands careful, like it was a bird with a hurt wing, straight to my sergeant. Sergeant Dunmore had been at Aldenhall even longer than I had. 28 years on the line. A great slab of a man, shoulders like a doorway, the sort who'd watched 3 monarchs come and go, and seemed to regard the whole pageant of it the way you'd regard weather, interesting enough, but nothing to lose your head over. Nothing rattled Dunmore. In all my years, I'd never once seen him so much as raise his voice. So I noticed very much when he went quiet over that box. He took it off me and turned it over in those big, careful hands of his, frowning down at it. He didn't try to open it either. He knew the rules better than I did. he'd written half of them. He just turned it slow, looking at the rust, the seized lid, the rags of rotted cloth. Behind the west wall, you say? Knee height, Sergeant, base course, right where the masons have been. He nodded, but he wasn't really listening to me by then. He'd gone still, and I watched his frown change from the ordinary "what's this?" then of a man examining a found object into something more careful, more guarded. He'd recognized something. I don't know what. The make of the tin, maybe. They don't make them like that anymore. Or just the sheer age of it, the particular age, placing it in his mind to a particular stretch of years. You logged the spot. To the inch, Sergeant. Good, he turned it once more. And you didn't open it? No. Tell me you didn't open it. I didn't open it, I swear. He nodded again, slower. And then he said a thing I didn't understand at all at the time, said it half to himself, very low, as if he wasn't sure he meant to say it out loud. There's a story about the West Wall, he said. An old one, from before even my time here. Something the late Duchess was meant to have hidden out there. The year before and he stopped himself dead, pressed his lips together, shook his head once like a man clearing it. No, forget I said that, probably nothing. Old palace gossip. The walls of this place are full of stories that aren't true. He tucked the box under one arm. I'll take it up the chain. Today, you go back on your line and you say nothing about this to anyone. Understood? Not a word. Not to the lads, not to your wife, not to the dog. Understood, Sergeant. But I'd heard him, the late Duchess. Now, I should tell you what that phrase does, in a place like Aldenhall. In Marennes, when an old palace hand lowers his voice and says, the late Duchess, in that particular tone, careful, almost tender, the way Dunmore had just said it, there is only ever one woman he can mean. Duchess Sera. She belonged to the generation before Eleanor's. She'd have been Eleanor's mother-in-law's age, near enough, had she lived. The beloved one. The one the whole country had taken clean into its heart, the way a country sometimes does, all at once and without asking permission. The young Duchess who'd married into the family when she was barely more than a girl, who'd never quite fit the cold machinery of palace life, who'd had a warmth to her that the cameras loved and the courtiers, by all accounts, did not. And then lost, suddenly, terribly, far too young, in a way that had stopped the entire nation in the street. I remember exactly where I was when the news came. Everyone of a certain age in Marennes does. That was more than 20 years gone now. And still her photograph sold out the postcard stands by the palace gates. Still people left flowers on the day, every year. Still, somehow, the country had never quite finished grieving her. There was a Sera-shaped ache in Marennes that all the years hadn't filled in. And the young men and women of the present family lived their whole public lives in the long shadow of her, measured against a memory, against a warmth nobody could ever quite live up to because the dead don't make mistakes anymore. And Dunmore had just told me, half told me, then snatched it back that this box might be hers, that she might have hidden it, out there in the west wall, in the last year of her life. I felt the hair lift right up along my arms, standing there in the cold guardroom. You think this is hers, I said. It came out almost a whisper. Dunmore looked at me a long, level moment, the most careful I'd ever seen the man. I think, he said quietly, that this goes up the chain today the way these things must, and I think you and I keep our mouths shut and our heads down, and I think we let people a great deal further up than you or me decide what it is and what's to be done about it. That's not our weight to carry, son. Be glad of that. And so that is exactly what we did. Here's what I pieced together later in scraps and fragments about what happened above me, because the moment that box left Dunmore's hands, I was nobody again. Just a guard, back on his line in the cold, knowing nothing, watching the gates. It went up, and then it went further up. And then somewhere up there, in some quiet paneled room I'll never see, behind a closed door, somebody finally worked that seized lid open. And what was inside stopped them where they stood. Because the old story Dunmore had half remembered, the palace gossip he'd tried to take back, it turned out to be true. All those years before, the late Duchess Sera, in a stretch of her life that the public never really saw, the hard and lonely stretch when her marriage was quietly coming apart and the palace felt less like a home than a beautiful cage with the country watching every window. In that time, she had taken something precious to her, and she had hidden it away. Not jewels in the way you'd think, not a tiara, not a necklace off the inventory. Something far more personal than that. A keepsake. A small private thing that, had it ever come to light in her lifetime, would have caused her real pain, and others too, because of what it was and what it meant, and whom it tied her to. So she'd hidden it. In the one place in all of Aldenhall where she could walk alone, every single morning without a camera or a courtier at her shoulder, the old west wall, round the back, where nobody important ever went. And then her life had ended. Suddenly. Before she could ever decide what was to be done with the thing. Before she could come back for it or destroy it or pass it on. Before anything. And so it had stayed, in the dark, in the cold heart of the wall. For more than 20 years, through restorations and royal weddings, through state funerals and christenings, through 3 generations of a family living their loud public lives 20 yards away, while the whole watching world stared at the front of the palace, and not one living soul gave a single thought to a loose stone round the back. Until a guard on an early October shift, with no idea what he was doing, pulled it out into the gray daylight. I knew none of that yet, of course. Standing on my line that week, I knew nothing at all. For about 6 days, in fact, absolutely nothing happened, and I started to feel a proper fool, started to tell myself the box had been some long-dead soldier's tobacco tin, hidden away for a laugh or a bet a century ago, and that I'd handed it up the chain with a great solemn face over nothing. I half expected Dunmore to come and rib me about it. And then on the 7th day, I got pulled off the line. Not in trouble. Dunmore made that clear straight off, came and found me himself, put one of those big hands on my shoulder and said it plain. You're not in any bother, son. You're wanted, that's all. But the way he said wanted, careful again, that same lowered voice, put my heart up in my throat. Wanted by someone. Someone who needed to ask me, in person and in private, exactly where I'd found the box, and exactly how, and whether I'd opened it, and whether I'd breathed a word of it to any living person. So I was taken inside, into the palace proper, not the parts the public file through on their tour, all roped walkways and audio guides. The quiet parts, the lived-in parts. I'd worked the grounds 20 years and never once been through those particular doors. The carpet in there is so thick it eats the sound right off your feet. You walk and you hear nothing, like moving through deep snow. Old portraits line the walls, faces I half knew from history books, watching you go by with that flat painted patience the dead have. The air smells different in there. Older. Beeswax and cold stone, and something I couldn't name. They brought me to a room I'd never seen and will never see again, and a steward opened the door and stood back, and let me go in alone. And the person waiting for me by the window, I genuinely hadn't been told who it would be. I'd assumed an official, a private secretary, one of the gray suit people with a clipboard and a careful manner, the ones who handle the things that mustn't get out. That's who you expect for a thing like this. It was not. It was the young Duchess herself. It was a leaner. I'd seen her, of course, from the line. The way the likes of me ever see them. A figure stepping quick from a car under an umbrella, a gloved hand lifted in a wave, a pale shape behind the tinted glass of a Bentley sliding through the gates. The whole country had watched her these past years, watched her marry into it all as a young woman, watched the cameras fasten onto her and never once let go, watched her learn to carry the weight and the watching and the impossible expectation of being the next great love of a nation that was still, underneath it all, grieving the last one. The most photographed woman in Marin. And I was about to understand, like Sera before her, a woman almost nobody truly knew. She was standing at the window when I came in, with the flat gray morning light behind her, and she turned, and she was not at all what I had braced for. Smaller, somehow, than she seemed in the photographs. More tired around the eyes, a real tiredness, the kind no photograph ever shows you, the kind makeup doesn't reach. And she was holding something. It took me a second to understand what, and when I did, it went through me like cold water. She was holding the box. The tin. My tin, the one I'd pulled out of the wall, open now, the seized lid finally lifted, and she held it in both hands, very carefully, very still, the way you hold a thing that might break apart or might burn you or both. "You're the one who found it," she said, not a question, quiet. "Yes, I fumbled the title, my mouth gone dry. "Yes, ma'am." She looked down at the open box in her hands. And for one moment this woman, whom I had only ever seen composed, immaculate, untouchable, behind glass and across distances and on the front pages of every paper in the land, this woman looked, for just a moment, like she might come apart entirely. Like she was holding herself together by main force. "Do you know whose this was?" she asked, still quiet, still not looking up. My sergeant thought it might have belonged to the late Duchess Sera, ma'am. He wasn't certain. Eleanor nodded slowly. Her thumb moved along the rusted edge of the tin, exactly the way Dunmore's thumb had moved over it, exactly the way mine had, kneeling in the cold. As though the thing pulled the very same small gesture out of every single person who ever held it, like a habit it taught your hands. "It was hers," she said. "It was Sera's." And she drew a breath that wasn't quite steady. "And what's inside it, what she hid in here, it changes something. Something I have been told to leave alone for 8 years. Something this family decided, a very long time ago, was better off buried for good. Kinder, they said, kinder to everyone, to leave it where it lay." She lifted her eyes to me then, and under all that tiredness, all that careful composure, there was a thing I hadn't expected to find. A steel. A flat, quiet, unbending steel. "And now," she said, "a guard has gone and dug it up out of the back wall of my own home, after 20 years. By pure chance, on a cold morning, because the sun happened to come out. The smallest, strangest ghost of a smile touched her mouth and went again. And I find that I cannot leave it alone any more. I have tried, standing here for the better part of an hour, to do what I have always been told to do and put it away and say nothing. And I find that I won't. I find that I can't. And that is where I have to leave the first part of it. Because I still didn't know, not standing in that room, what was actually inside the box. What Sera had hidden there in her loneliest year. What the family had decided, long before Eleanor ever married, into it, to bury and never speak of. What was kinder left where it lay. I would find out. Eleanor would tell me herself, in time would choose to tell me, of all the people in the world, a guard off the line whose name she'd only just learned, and the strangeness of that has never once left me. Why me? I've turned that over 1,000 times. I think in the end it was because I was the one who found it. I'd pulled it into the light, and I think she felt that made it, somehow, partly mine to know. But all I understood, standing in that hushed room with the gray light coming through the window and the most watched woman in the country holding a rusted tin in her 2 hands, all I understood then was this. A thing the late Duchess Sera had hidden in the saddest year of her life, had waited 20 years in the dark of a wall. And it had come back into the light in the hands of the one woman in that whole great palace who was stubborn enough, and kind enough, and just plain brave enough to refuse to put it back. Whatever was in that box had broken one duchess's heart long ago. And now I could see it in her face. It was about to force another one to act. She didn't tell me straight away what was inside it. I think she wanted to, but couldn't, not all at once. Some things you have to come at sideways. So she set the box down on a small table by the window, gently, both hands, and she stood looking out at the gray forecourt for a while, and I stood there not knowing whether I was allowed to speak or even to move. Then she said, without turning round, "Tell me how you found it, all of it. Don't leave anything out." So I told her, The early shift, the pewter sky, the mason's scaffolding and the loose stone and the 10 minutes of weak sun that caught the edge of it. How I'd crouched down, how I'd worked my fingers in, how I'd known I shouldn't but had eased it out anyway. The rags of rotted oilcloth. The feeling, I almost didn't say this part, it sounded mad, the feeling that I'd interrupted something, that it had been waiting. She listened to every word with her back to me, very still. And when I got to that last bit, the waiting, I saw her shoulders move, just slightly. 20 years, she said quietly. She put it there, and then she was gone within the year, and it waited 20 years for a man on an early shift. She turned round at last. Do you believe in things like that? That a thing waits until the right person comes? I didn't know what to say to a duchess, so I said the truth. I didn't. Before that morning, ma'am, I'd have said no. And now I'm standing in a room I've never been in, talking to you, so I don't know what I believe anymore. And that of all things made her smile, a real one, brief, tired, but real. I think it was the first honest thing anyone had said to her about the box. Everyone above her had been careful. I'd just been plain. She picked the tin back up, and this time she opened it the rest of the way and turned it and held it out so I could see. There were 2 things inside. The first was a locket, small gold gondel on a fine broken chain, old. Nothing about it grand, not a state jewel, not something off any inventory. The kind of locket a person buys with their own money and wears against the skin under the clothes where the cameras can't see. Eleanor touched the little clasp with her thumbnail and it opened, and inside was a photograph. Tiny, faded to browns, a baby, just a baby, weeks old maybe, asleep. The second thing was a letter, folded small to fit the tin, the paper gone soft and yellow at the creases, the ink faded but still there. A few pages, written by hand fast, you could see the hurry in it, the way the lines ran downhill toward the end of each page. The letter is hers, Eleanor said, Sera's. I'd know her hand anywhere. I've spent 8 years being shown her letters, her diaries, taught to write my thank you notes the way she wrote hers, told to be more like her and never compare yourself to her in the same breath. A small dry sound, not quite a laugh. I know her handwriting better than my own mother's. And the baby, I asked. I shouldn't have, but it was out before I could stop it. Eleanor looked at the little faded photograph for a long moment. That, she said, is the thing they buried. Now I have to be careful how I tell this, because it's not my secret, and even now, after everything, parts of it aren't mine to spell out. So I'll tell you the shape of it, the way Eleanor told me, and I'll leave the edges soft where they ought to stay soft. Years before she died, in that hard, lonely stretch of her life, the failing marriage, the cold palace, the country watching every window, Sera had done a quiet kindness, a private one. There had been a young woman in her household, someone who served her closely, who'd found herself in terrible trouble of the kind that in those days in that world could end a young woman entirely. Alone, frightened, a child coming and no one to stand with her, and a family that would have cast her out. And Sera, who knew exactly what it was to be alone inside a great house, who knew what it was to be watched and judged and found wanting. Sera had quietly taken care of her, had hidden her away to have the child safely, had arranged with her own money and her own influence and complete secrecy for the baby to go to a good family, a loving one, far from the palace, far from the papers, far from any of it, given the child a life, a real one, an ordinary one, the kind Sera herself never got to have. And she had asked only one thing in return, that it stay secret, forever, to protect the young woman, to protect the child most of all, to let that baby grow up an ordinary person, loved, unwatched, free of all of this. The locket and the photograph were the young mother's. She'd given them to Sera the night the baby went as the only thank you she had. And the letter was Sera writing it all down, everything, names, dates. The family the child went to, where. So that the truth would exist somewhere, written down, kept safe, in case it was ever needed. In case, one day, the child grew up and went looking, and deserved to be met with the truth instead of a locked door. She'd hidden it in the wall, meaning, I think, to keep it safe until the right moment, meaning to be the one who decided when and how and whether. And then she died, before she could ever decide anything. The family found out about it years ago, Eleanor said. Not from this they never found, but there were whispers even then, people in the household who half knew. And when it came up the question of whether to ever look into it, whether to find this child now grown and acknowledge what Sera had done, she shook her head. They buried it, all of them. Years before I married in. The decision was already old and cold by the time I ever heard of it. Why, I asked. Scandal, she said the word like it tasted of metal. A secret like that attached to Sera's name, to the most beloved woman this country has ever lost. The papers would have torn it to pieces. They'd have made it ugly. They'd have invented things. It would have hurt the child, they said. Hurt the young woman if she still lived. Hurt the monarchy. So much potential for harm, and what good could come of it now? Kinder to leave it. Kinder to everyone. She looked at the letter in her lap. That was the word they always used, kinder. And you don't think it's kinder? She was quiet for a moment. I think, she said slowly, that somewhere out there is a person, a grown person now, near my own age, who has spent their whole life not knowing where they came from, who Sera made sure was loved, yes, and safe and ordinary, and I'm glad of all of it, but who never knew that a duchess, one of the kindest women this country ever had, held them as a baby and wept over them and gave up the right to ever know them, to give them a life, who never knew they were wanted. That they were the reason a frightened woman wasn't cast out alone, that their existence was, to someone, an act of love and not of shame. She lifted the letter. Sera wrote it all down so that the truth would survive her. She wanted it kept. She didn't hide this to bury it, she hid it to protect it. There's a difference, and the family read her intention exactly backwards. They decided her secret meant never tell, but that's not what this is. She tapped the soft yellow pages. This is a woman making sure the truth couldn't die with her. This is Sera saying, when the time is right, let them know. She set it down. And now a guard has dug it out of a wall on the one cold morning the sun came out. After 20 years, if that's not the time being right, I don't know what is. I want to tell you I said something wise. I didn't. I just stood there, this guard off the line, holding the whole weight of a dead duchess's secret in a room I'd never been in, and feeling far, far out of my depth. But I did say one thing, and I've been glad of it ever since. I said, ma'am, does the person know they exist? I mean, are they out there somewhere just living, with no idea any of this is about them? Eleanor looked at me. As far as I know, she said, they have no idea at all. They were raised by the family Sera chose. They grew up loved. They've lived a whole ordinary life. And somewhere in it, I imagine, there's been a question they could never answer. A blank space where the beginning of their story should be. She pressed her lips together. There usually is, with the adopted ones I mean, a space. Then it seems to me, I said, and I don't know where the nerve came from, that this was never really the family's secret to keep or to bury. It was that person's. It's theirs. It always was. Sera didn't write it down for the palace. She wrote it down for them. The room went very quiet. And Eleanor looked at me for a long, long moment, and something settled in her face. Some last hesitation going out of it. She'd come into that room having already half decided, I think. I just said out loud the thing she'd been circling. Yes, she said softly, she did. That's exactly what she did. Here's the thing about Eleanor that I learned that day. The thing the photographs never told anyone. The whole country thought of her as the dutiful one, the careful one. The one who never put a foot wrong, who did as she was told, who carried the role like she'd been born to it. And she was all of that. But underneath the careful surface there was a spine of pure iron, and a kindness fierce enough to go against the entire weight of the family she'd married into, quietly, without drama, but completely. Because she knew what they didn't want to say out loud. That kinder to leave it had never really been about kindness. It had been about comfort, the family's comfort, their reputation, the clean, perfect, marketable memory of Sera. They'd buried it not to protect a child they'd never met, but to protect themselves from a story they couldn't control. And they dressed that up in the word kind for 20 years until they half believed it. Elinor didn't believe it. Elinor, who lived every day being measured against Sera's ghost, understood Sera better than any of them. Understood that the real woman, the warm and reckless and lonely one, would have hated what they'd done in her name. That Sera had risked everything once for a frightened young woman and a baby that was nothing to do with her, and that to honor Sera you didn't polish her statue. You did what she would have done. "They'll fight me," Elinor said. She'd gone to the window again, looking out. "Every step, they'll tell me I'm being naive. They'll tell me I don't understand how these things go, the press, the damage. They'll tell me to think of the family. They may be right about the cost." She turned. "But I've decided. I'm going to find this person, carefully, privately, with every protection I can give them. And I'm going to put this in their hands, the letter, the locket, all of it, and I'm going to let them decide what happens next. Not the family, not me, them, because it was always theirs." "Why are you telling me, ma'am?" I finally asked. It had been sitting on me the whole time. "I'm just a guard. I found a box. You could have thanked me and sent me back to the line and I'd never have known any of this." She considered me. "Because you found it," she said simply. "Out of everyone in this whole palace, all the secretaries and advisors, and the people who knew the old story and chose to keep it buried, the person it actually showed itself to was you. A man on an early shift who had no idea what it was and handed it straight up the chain without prying, without selling it, without a word to a single soul. Dunmore told me. He said in 20 years you'd never once put a foot wrong." A faint smile. "I find I trust the man the box chose over all the men who buried it." Then her face turned serious. "And because I may need you," she said, quietly. "There are very few people in this building I can be certain won't run straight to someone to stop me. You're not one of them. You answer to your sergeant and your sergeant answers to the post, and neither of you has any stake in keeping Sera's statue clean." She held my eye. "I'm not ordering you. I'd never. But if I ask, quietly, for your help in the weeks ahead, will you give it?" And I'll tell you exactly what I said, because it's the truest thing I said in that whole strange room. "Ma'am," I said, "I pulled that box out of the dark by accident. If you're going to carry it the rest of the way into the light, then yes, whatever you need, I'm in it now too." She nodded just once, like a thing being sealed. And that's where the second part has to end. Because it wasn't simple after that. Of course it wasn't. Finding a person who'd been hidden for 40 years, quietly, without the press getting wind, without the family finding out before it was done, that's not a thing you do in an afternoon. There were dead ends. There were people who'd died, records that had moved, a trail that had gone cold decades back, deliberately, because Sera had covered it so well precisely so that no one could ever do what we were now trying to do. And there was the family, beginning to sense something, beginning to ask Elinor quiet, pointed questions, a pressure tightening around her that she had to keep smiling through at every engagement, every photograph, while underneath she ran a secret search that could blow up in her face at any moment. But she didn't stop, not once. And in the end, months on, in a small, ordinary house in a town I'd never heard of, a long way from any palace, a grown stranger who had spent a whole lifetime with a blank space where the beginning of their story should be, was going to open a door and find a Duchess standing on the step, holding a rusted tin box and a letter and the truth. It took 4 months. 4 months of the strangest double life I've ever lived. By day I was exactly what I'd always been, a guard on the line at Aldenhall, eyes front, the cold getting worse as autumn went into winter, tourists in their proper coats, the same forecourt, the same gates. Nobody looking at me would have guessed a thing. That's the job. You learn to carry whatever's inside you behind a face that gives nothing away. But every week or two, quietly, I'd be pulled in, never the same way twice. A note passed through Dunmore, a car at an odd hour. And I'd find myself somewhere I had no business being, helping a duchess do a thing the rest of her family would have stopped cold if they'd known. I won't pretend I did much. I'm not going to dress it up. Eleanor had real people for the real work, a private researcher she trusted absolutely, an old friend from before her marriage who owed her nothing to the palace and everything to her. They did the digging. What I did was simpler. I was someone she could think out loud in front of, someone with no stake, someone who'd say that sounds right or that sounds like trouble, ma'am, and mean it. 20 years on a gate makes you good at one thing above all others, knowing when something's about to go wrong. And things nearly went wrong more than once. The trail had gone properly cold. That was the trouble. Sera hadn't just hidden the child, she'd hidden the route to the child, covered it over so well, so deliberately, exactly so that no one could ever undo it against the family's wishes. Records had been kept vague on purpose. A name changed here. A date softened there. The young mother, we learned early, had died years ago, quietly, far away, having never told a soul. So the one living thread back to the truth was gone. What we had was the letter, Sera's own hand, written fast and frightened in her last lonely year. Names, a town, the family the baby went to, but 40 years is 40 years. Families move, people die, towns change past recognizing. The researcher would chase a name and it would dissolve in her hands. There was a night, I remember it, when Eleanor very nearly gave up. Not from fear, from a worse thing, from doubt. We were in a quiet room and she had the letter in front of her and she said, very low, "What if they're happy? What if I find them and they have a good life and a settled heart and no questions at all? And I turn up on the doorstep with a rusted tin and a dead Duchess's secret, and I break something that didn't need breaking. What if kinder to leave it was right all along, and I've just been too proud to see it?" And I didn't have a palace answer for that. I'm not a clever man, so I said the only thing I had. "Ma'am," I said, "you keep saying you'll let them decide, find them, knock. And if they open the door and they're whole and they don't want it, then you put the box back in your bag and you wish them well and you leave, and you've taken nothing. The only person who can decide it's better not to know is them. You're not deciding for them by finding them. You're only deciding for them if you don't." She looked at me a long while. "Dunmore was right about you," she said. And she didn't give up. The family was circling by then. That was the other pressure, the constant one. They'd sensed something. You can't run a secret search for months inside a place like that without the air changing. There were questions, gentle, pointed, dressed up as concern. "Eleanor, you seem distracted. Eleanor, is everything all right? Eleanor, you've been making private arrangements." An older voice in the family, I never knew exactly who, she never named them, pulled her aside after some engagement and reminded her, kindly, smiling for the cameras the whole time, that the family's strength was that it spoke with one voice. That solo acts had a way of ending badly. That Sera, after all, had been a solo act, and look how that ended. That last part, Eleanor told me, was the one that nearly broke her composure in public. Look how that ended. Said about the woman whose memory they polished on every coin and postcard. Said as a warning. As if Sera's warmth had been her flaw, the thing that killed her, the cautionary tale. "That's when I knew I'd never stop," Eleanor said, "when they used her as the warning. They've spent 20 years turning the most loving woman this country ever had into a lesson about staying in line. I won't be the next one. And I won't let her last act of love stay buried so they can keep her statue clean." So she smiled, and she said all the right things, and she gave them nothing. And underneath, she kept looking. And then in February, the researcher found them. I wasn't there for that part, the actual finding. I just got the word late one night through Dunmore. "She's found the person. It's real, it's confirmed." And I stood on my own cold doorstep at home and felt something go through me that I still can't name. 4 months, 20 years, 40, a box in a wall. And now, somewhere out there, an ordinary front door with an ordinary person behind it who had no idea that the most watched woman in the country was about to drive to their town. The person, I'm going to keep them as private as Sera tried to, so I'll just tell you the shape. A grown adult near Alina's own age, give or take. Raised by the family Sera had chosen, and Sera had chosen well. That was the thing that made Alina cry when she heard the details. A good family, a loving one. The child had grown up wanted, settled, ordinary, exactly as Sera had wished. A quiet life in a small town, far from any of this. And the researcher had learned this carefully, through a mutual contact, without ever revealing why. There was a blank space, just as Alina had guessed there would be. The person knew they'd been adopted, had always known, and had always carried that small, particular ache the adopted ones carry, not unhappiness, just a question with no floor under it. Where did I come from? Was I wanted, or was I a thing to be got rid of? 40 years of not knowing the answer. And the answer, the whole time, had been, you were so wanted that a duchess broke every rule of her world to give you a life, and wrote it all down so you'd one day know it. Alina decided to go herself. Of course she did. No letter, no intermediary, no announcement, just her. And she asked me to drive out with her, not into the room, just to be there outside, the one face she knew that had no stake in any of it. You found it, she said again. You should be near when it ends. It was a gray February afternoon, cold and still, the light already going. Just an ordinary street, ordinary houses, a small front garden, a bin out for collection, a child's bicycle on its side on the path 2 doors down, the most unroyal place in the world. We sat in the car a little way off for a long moment, and I could see Alina's hands, and they weren't steady. The most composed woman in the country, and her hands weren't steady. She had the tin box in a plain cloth bag on her lap, the letter, the locket. What if I've got it wrong, she said, one last time. Then you'll know, I said. Inside the first minute you'll know. You'll see their face when they open the door, and if it's wrong, you leave. But I don't think it's wrong, ma'am. I've never thought it was wrong. I think Sera hid that box so that one day exactly this would happen. I think she's been waiting on it as long as it has. Alina looked at me, and then she did something I'll never forget. She reached over and squeezed my hand once hard, a guard's hand, and she got out of the car. I watched her walk up that ordinary path. Coat, scarf, the bag held in both arms against her chest. No cameras, no crowd, nobody in all the world knowing where the most photographed woman in Marin was at that moment except me and a researcher and a sergeant. She stood at the door a second, gathered herself. And she knocked. I didn't hear what was said. I was too far back and it wasn't mine to hear, so I'll only tell you what I saw. The door opened. A figure in the doorway. I couldn't make out the face from where I sat, and I'm glad of it. It kept their privacy whole even for me. There was a moment of the ordinary confusion you'd expect, a stranger on the step in the cold. And then I saw Alina begin to speak, slow, careful, both hands still wrapped round that bag. And I watched the figure in the doorway go very still. That stillness, I knew it. I'd felt it myself, kneeling at the wall 4 months before, holding the cold tin, knowing I'd interrupted something that had been waiting a long time. It's the stillness of a person at the exact second the floor of their whole life shifts under them. They didn't slam the door. They didn't turn away. After a moment, a long one, they stepped back and they let Alina in. And the door closed gently behind them both. And I sat in that car on that ordinary gray street for the better part of an hour, in the cold, watching a closed front door, and I have never in my life felt so much hanging on a thing I couldn't see. When Alina came out, it was nearly dark. She walked back to the car slowly, and she'd been crying. I could see that plainly, no hiding it, her careful composure all gone soft. But it wasn't grief on her face. I want to be clear about that. It was the other thing. The thing that looks almost the same but isn't. Relief. Release. The look of a person who's set down a weight they've carried so long they'd forgotten it could be set down at all. She got in, sat for a moment without speaking. Then she said very quietly, "They didn't know any of it. 40 years and they never knew." Her voice caught. "And do you know the first thing they said to me? After I'd told them, after I'd shown them Sera's letter, her own hand, telling them how she held them, how she wept, how she chose the family she gave them to with such care," Alina pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. "The first thing they said was, 'So I was wanted.' Not a question, like they were saying it to themselves, trying it out, after a whole lifetime. 'So I was wanted.' We sat there in the dark. I gave them everything," Alina said. "The box, the letter, the locket, all of it. It's theirs now. And I told them what I always meant to tell them, that what happens next is entirely theirs to choose. If they want to know more, the door's open. If they want to come forward ever, we'll stand with them and protect them. And if they want to take this box and close their door and never hear from any of us again, to keep their quiet life exactly as it is, now that the one thing they needed is answered, then that's theirs too, and we'll honor it completely and never trouble them again." She let out a long breath. "They haven't decided. They don't have to. They've got the rest of their life to decide. The only thing that mattered was that the choosing finally belonged to them." "And the family?" I asked. "Yours, I mean." A small, tired, unbreakable smile. "I'll tell them what I did," she said. "And they'll be angry and they'll be afraid, and some of them won't forgive me for a long while. But I'll tell them this too, that I did it the way Sera would have, privately, kindly, with the person's choice held above everything, that I didn't dig up a scandal, I delivered a letter that had been trying to get to its reader for 20 years. She looked out at the dark street. And if they want to be cross with someone, they can be cross with the wall for not holding the stone a little longer. I went back to the line. That's the strange truth of it. The next morning I was on the early shift again, west side, the same gray forecourt, the same cold getting into the same seams. Eyes front, a guard like I'd always been. Nobody walking past would ever have known that the man on the gate had, 4 months before, pulled a dead Duchess's last act of love out of a wall, or that he'd sat in a car on an ordinary street and watched a lifetime's blank space get filled in. That's the thing about this job. You hold things. You hold them behind a face that gives nothing away, and you let the world look at you and see only stillness, only stone. They never guess what's inside. They never do. The masons finished the west wall that spring, repointed it, packed in fresh lime, sealed up every gap. You'd never know now there was ever a hollow in it. Never know a box sat in the dark there for 20 years waiting. Sometimes, walking my line, I stop by that stretch of wall, just for a second. And I think about Sera, the real one, not the postcard, not the statue. A frightened, lonely, loving woman in the worst year of her life, doing one last enormous kindness for a stranger's child, and writing it all down, and hiding it where she walked alone, trusting that one day the right person would come, and the wall would give it up, and the truth would finally reach the one it was always meant for. She was right to trust it. It just took 20 years and a loose stone and 10 minutes of winter sun. And a young Duchess who refused, when everyone she loved told her to leave the dark alone. Some things wait in the dark a very long time, but they're not lost, not really. They're only waiting for the one person brave enough to reach in and bring them back into the light.